For the embossing concept, you have created a few sketches that we can pull ideas from. Those are a few of my sketches of designs that I used in the past. Here are what the finished plates look like that you will then later be pressing into your flat forms like slab plates or coasters. So I want to walk you through now the carving process. You are going to need a bench hook, a gouge, and of course a piece of the easy carve material that we're going to be using. Before we officially get started, I want to show you some things about your gouge. First of all, in the handle of the gouge, you will find your tips. So if you unscrew the end, you'll find them nestled inside. You want to pour those out and you want to find a couple tips first. Let's look for the blade tip first. You're going to be using this to cut excess material off of the edges. And then we're going to start with a number one. It has a little tiny number one on the back side of it, but it is a very small tip. This one is going to be your best friend throughout the carving process. So take those two tips out and toss the rest back in the handle and put that handle back together again. So let's talk about inserting the tips. If you look inside this tool, you'll see that there is a circle right in the middle, and then there's kind of like a thin arch and a thick arch. You're going to be placing this tip right in between that center circle and the thin arch. You want to start with loosening the metal end like this, but you want to make sure that you don't take it off completely. If it falls apart and you lose that small center piece, the gouge will no longer be usable. But you want to loosen it enough that you can get that gouge tip into the tip of the tool. So I have inserted it in. You can see how it sits inside there. And I'm going to tighten it. And then I'm going to gently pull and make sure that it stays in. So now my gouge is ready to use. Once you're ready to carve, you want to transfer your design to the easy carve plate. So you're going to start with pencil and make your design fill as much of the space as possible. You can see that I already started to cut away at this block, but the octopus design fills the picture plane. You do not want to waste material, so you really want to make sure that you're filling that space or cut your block down in size. You can see that I started to do this design this direction initially, and then I wasn't satisfied with it. So I flipped the block over and I positioned it on a diagonal, and it looks a lot nicer that way. So after you've transferred your design in pencil, you then want to go over it with a thick Sharpie marker. The thin Sharpie markers do not work so well. They seem to run out of ink very quickly on this easy carve. So now I'm going to angle the camera down, and we're going to start with just cutting away the excess material. So I'm going to place it on my bench hook, and you can see that my bench hook kind of hooks over the edge of the table surface like this. Okay. And then I'm going to, as much as possible, cut away from me, not towards me. So I'm going to hold the blade and begin to cut, moving my hand away. If you do need to move towards yourself a bit for a better sense of control, you want to always make sure that your hands are out of the way. So I'm going to pull towards me very slowly and carefully, but keep my hands out of the way. So now I'll be able to remove that material that I do not want, and I'm going to leave any small areas intact with material. What I mean by that is on this octopus block, I purposely left easy carve material between these two tentacles. The reason for that is if I were to cut in between those two, I would have very thin and very vulnerable edges that would easily break off. I'm also not going to worry about cutting out all negative space, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use decorative lines or gouge marks to actually contribute to the design. So what I mean by that is when I'm looking at this easy carve block, you see how my lines, my carvings, move in the same direction as the composition itself. These lines will be visible whenever you emboss in the clay form. With these floral plates that I have, you'll see that the flower designs also move in the direction of each of the petals in leaves. There's all those little detail lines in there that are super important for the overall composition. I'm going to do the very same thing with the octopus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change tips. I also want to show you what to do if your tip gets stuck in the end of your gouge. If your tip gets stuck, you want to make sure you're over a work surface, all right? And you want to unscrew the tip of the gouge, completely take it off ever so carefully, and then you're going to tap it on the table surface. When you do that, you will see that 3 parts plus your tip come apart. You want to make sure that you're putting it back together properly. So you'll see that the edges of the tip line up. You want to make sure you're lining it up properly, placing it down into the tip, and then gently starting to screw it on. You can then put your new tip in on the thin side. So you want to place your tip right in between that thin arch and the ball. Tighten it up, do a little check to make sure it does not easily pull out. So now I'm ready to gouge. So you want to make sure that your gouge marks are moving in the direction of your composition. You also want to definitely make sure that you're never gouging towards yourself. If you need to change directions, move the block. Do not gouge towards yourself. So I'm going to continue to remove material in this negative space as well as between these tentacles here. I'm going to then cut away from this part of the composition to remove this excess material. I've completed one of the 2 octopus designs with the Easy Carve. I want to show you how to handle areas that overlap in your composition. In other words, I have the line of one tentacle overlapping another area. So what I've done is I have gone in with a very thin gouge tip and just simply gouged out a thin line where it overlaps, and that helps divide the form. So once you have your composition completely carved, you want to look at this outside edge and make sure that the outside edge relates really well with the composition inside. For example, I went back in and cut a more scalloped edge right here and here, because that related a lot better with all these curves that I have in the form. So you really want to pay close attention to not only the design that is in the center area of the block, but also your edge. So this plate is now ready to emboss into a slab form.